We're getting ready to do another little Bible study here. This is going to be in the book of Daniel. We are in the book of Daniel, chapter number 5. We're going to take a look at some things while you're getting set up there and getting ready. I don't really have any announcements for you that anything new that you don't already know about. One thing I'd like to mention to you, though, I've been thinking about this today, and I'd appreciate it if you all would take a minute and think about this. There's a young man that we support from Thompson's Chapel. He just graduated from Ambassador College. He is studying to be a missionary slash evangelist, whatever the Lord has for him. Nathaniel Bonnell, he is Walt Bonnell's son out of Cashmere Baptist Church. They have a program going on this summer, and he's getting ready to leave here very shortly to go to Washington, D.C., and they're going to spend the biggest part of the summer up there handing out Bible tracts, holding signs, street preaching, holding meetings, just working in that area. And I think there are several kids going, and there are some churches that are supporting them. What I would like for you to do and what I would like for you to think about is just to keep Nathaniel in your prayer. This is going to be hard work. That's not a safe place to be up there. And he's up there trying to do the Lord's work. So just remember him. Say a little prayer for him when you get a chance. Okay, we are in the book of Daniel. We're going to start here in chapter number 5. Now, what we want to take a look at, what we want to think about here for just a minute before we start into, let me get caught up here, before we start into chapter number 5. Nebuchadnezzar. Remember Nebuchadnezzar. We just got finished with him. Remember how he was had the sin of pride and how he was talking about how well he had done and how God humbled him, and he ended up in eating grass, and he lost his mind for 7 years and lived in the fields. God brought him back and gave his kingdom back to him, and there was some discussion about whether Nebuchadnezzar got saved or not. And we saw what happened there, and we talked a lot about this sin of pride. And we're going to talk about this again here in just a minute. We're going to talk about Belshazzar, who is Nebuchadnezzar's son. But before we do this, I got a couple of verses here that I want to show you. This first one's in the book of Proverbs, chapter 16 and verse number 18. I know these are familiar verses. It says, pride goeth before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. We're going to see a haughty spirit fall here just in a moment. And we have to realize how serious this sin of pride is. We talked about this before, how there are commentators and Bible scholars who believe that all the other sin comes from this sin of pride. For example, the hate, envy, covetousness, those kind of things come from and are centered around that sin of pride. And this is something that God simply is not going to tolerate. Your next verse here is in the book of James, but he giveth more grace, wherefore he saith, God resisteth the proud, but giveth grace to the humble. And there are several verses in here that we could use, that we could look at, but we need to focus on this particularly, this sin of pride and how God deals with it as we look at Belshazzar. We're here in chapter number 5. Now, Belshazzar is Nebuchadnezzar's son. Now, since Nebuchadnezzar has been king, there has been several years that have passed. Nebuchadnezzar has passed away. Belshazzar is his son. Daniel is no longer one of the top guys in the government. He's back doing whatever it was he was doing before. And Belshazzar and his people have this big party. Now, we're going to talk about that in just a second. But I want to come back, and I want you to think about this sin of pride that we were talking about. In Babylon, and as you go on through the scriptures, particularly you get into the book of Revelation, it talks quite a lot about Babylon. And although Babylon does end up being destroyed, this Babylonian spirit carries over. And that's what these people had. And with Belshazzar, and you can see it plainly, it was more than just being prideful. Belshazzar and the people of Babylon had a complete disregard for God. It wasn't that they were being disobedient. They weren't even thinking about it. In this day and time, when Belshazzar is king here, Babylon was at its height. Babylon was a tremendous city for that day and time. I mean, it was It was a big city. It had walls around it. It had architecture. It had medicine. It had libraries, um, those kind of things. I think one of the seven wonders of the ancient world was the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. I mean, this place, and it was running wide open, and there was no regard for God. This Babylonian spirit that existed was simply, we don't need him. We're doing fine on our own. And it came to the place where not only did they just disobey God, they snubbed him. They just completely said, "No, we're not interested. Never mind. We don't want none of that." And we see that here with Belshazzar, and it continues. This particular Babylonian spirit continues on through the scripture. Now, so what they're doing is in chapter number 5, verse number 1, Belshazzar the king made a great feast to 1,000 of his lords and drank wine before the thousand. This is a party, this is a feast, this is a festival where Belshazzar has got all his people together, all his princes and everybody that works for him. They've all come together, and there's 1,000 of them. And this is basically a big drunken party. One of the commentators that I was reading the other day used the term licentious debauchery. All right. And basically, what he's talking about here is, you do whatever you want. Okay. You don't answer to anybody. This is part of this Babylonian spirit. We are independent from everybody. We are independent from everything. We have what we have because of who we are, and we'll do whatever we want. Now, that's what was going on. All of a sudden, this Belshazzar, he gets this idea, and he sends some of his people down into the basement. They get all of these golden cups and saucers and candlesticks that Nebuchadnezzar brought from the temple in Jerusalem. The last trip that Nebuchadnezzar made through Jerusalem, when he was burning and slashing and stomping, and he went into the temple and got all of these golden treasures, these holy cups and everything that was in the temple, and he brought them back to Babylon with him. Now, his son is gathering all these things up, bringing them upstairs, and they're going to use them. They're going to drink wine out of them. They are going to completely and teetotally disrespect God and everything that's holy about him. All right. That's what we need to understand here. And we need to realize this. And we see this in our world today. We're going to talk about that in just a minute. This goes beyond disobedience. All right. This is a complete disregard. God is not even on their mind here as they proceed. Now, he is getting ready to here in just a little bit, but right now he is not on their mind. So what happens is they're having this party, right? Verse number 4, they drank wine and praised the gods of gold and of silver and of brass and iron and wood and stone. Now, verse number 5, you've heard the term, the writing on the wall. All right. Well, this is where it comes from. What happens is there is a hand that appears, just a hand like this, and it writes a message on the wall. Just a hand writes a message on the wall. Now, Belshazzar sees this. Okay. Now, what happens next is a pretty amazing thing. Belshazzar, in verse number 6, it says, then the king's countenance was changed, and his thoughts troubled him, so that the joints of his loins were loose, and his knees smote one against the other. All right. Belshazzar, who is having a big drinking time here, sees this, and you've heard the term scared sober. Belshazzar was scared sober here. He is no longer having a big time. The drunkenness is scared out of him, and he sees this, and it troubles him, and it scares him to the point where his knees are knocking together. That's what we're talking about here. Now, what is getting ready to happen, and we'll see this in just a few minutes, but what's getting ready to happen here is God has said, all right, that's enough. All right, you're done. We're finished with this. It seems to be that when Belshazzar goes into the basement and brings these golden cups and stuff, these holy things from the temple, he crossed the line right there. And everything that led up to that. And now all of a sudden God says, okay, whoa. We're not doing this no more. Now, we'll see what happens here in just a minute. I want to show you one more Bible verse here right quick. Let me see if I can find it. There it is. And it says, Psalm 89, verse number 7, it says, God is greatly to be feared in the assembly of the saints. This is not an assembly of the saints, so God should be feared that much more. And to be had in reverence of all them that are about him. We see what God expects from you and I, all right? And we see what was going on with this group of people. And we're going to see what God does about it. In the book of Galatians, it's in the book of Galatians. Let me find it right quick and I'll read that for you. It's in the book of Galatians. Book of Galatians is in chapter number 5, and it is verse number 7. Book of Galatians, chapter number 5, and verse number 7. Let me get to it here just a minute. Wait just a minute. I'm in the wrong place. I'm sorry. It's Galatians chapter 6. Galatians chapter 6 and verse number 7. It says, be not deceived. God is not mocked. For whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap. For he that soweth to his flesh shall of the flesh reap corruption, and he that soweth to the Spirit shall of the Spirit reap life everlasting. Belshazzar and his buddies are sowing to the flesh just as hard and fast as they can, and they are in the process of mocking God. Now, so this hand appears, the writing on the wall. Now, the next thing that happens, and we've seen this before, you and I understand this. Belshazzar gets all of his guys, the wise men, the astrologers, the magicians, the soothsayers, and he brings them all in there and says, look at this. What does it mean? They cannot interpret what it means. They do not know what it means. Now, you and I have talked about this before. The reason that these men cannot interpret this is a revelation from God. This is a message from God. The natural man cannot understand the things of God. A lost person cannot interpret the words of God. And these men were as lost gets. It works the same way today. Let me give you one more Bible verse right quick. This is in 1 Corinthians. It's in 1 Corinthians chapter 2. Verse number 14, 1 Corinthians chapter 2 and verse number 14. 1 Corinthians chapter 2 and verse number 14 says, but the natural man receiveth not the things of the Spirit of God, for they are foolishness unto him, neither can he know them, because they are spiritually discerned. These men do not have a shot at interpreting this message from God. Now, what happens next is the queen comes to Belshazzar, and says, you need to go find Daniel. She comes to Belshazzar and tells him about Daniel and says, this is who you need. Now, we know and saw Daniel from the very beginning, back in chapter number 1, it talks about the fact that God gave Daniel this gift of interpreting dreams and interpreting visions. So wherever Daniel is, the king sends for him. All right. Verse number 13, it said, then was Daniel brought in before the king. Now, what we want to look at here for just a minute is what Daniel tells this guy. Okay. You know, he brings Daniel in there and he says, I'll give you this and I'll give you this and we'll do this if you'll tell me what this means. Daniel, first of all, was not impressed by this guy. Second of all, one thing that we need to remember and we need to think about for just a little bit. See, a lot of time has passed here. Daniel's growing older, right? But God, through Daniel's time in Babylon, from the very first, when Daniel purposed in his heart, right, not to eat the king's meat, not to defile himself, God has been with Daniel and watched over Daniel and looked after Daniel all through this time. And Daniel is living in a place where the wickedness is everywhere, right? And God sees him through it. And Daniel remains faithful. Okay, that's the important part. Daniel remains faithful to God. God remains faithful to his promises. God's looking after Daniel. Okay, he didn't go away. He didn't forget about him. He's right there with him and has been from the start. Now, what you and I need to understand, and this is important, this is real important. We live in a Babylonian world today. There is a tremendous amount of evil and wickedness that's going on in this world. You and I sit down here in our little corner of Monroe County and watch it on the news and think, wow, ain't that something? Right? It's everywhere. And what you and I have to understand, and what we can get hope from and have peace with, is we see how God never left Daniel. Right? As long as we remain faithful, right, obedient to God, being in his will, he will never leave us nor forsake us. No matter what goes on in the rest of the world, God will always be right here with me, and he'll be right here with you. He'll never leave us nor forsake us as long as we are obedient and continue in his will, no matter how wicked the world gets. And by the way, it's going to get worse. You do know that. It's going to get worse. It's not going to get better. One of the things that we talk about sometimes at Thompson's Chapel, there is a lot of wickedness in the world, and there's a lot of craziness in the world. Now, these two things are beginning to combine, and you see it. A person who will walk into a building with an automatic weapon and just start shooting people because he don't know no better, or because he doesn't really care, or for whatever reason he's concocted, is nothing but evil and craziness. And you begin to put them together, and we can see those things happen. You and I take peace in the fact that God's always with us. He is always with us, no matter how bad it gets. All right. So Daniel comes in there and he looks at this guy and he says, all right. Verse number 22, he tells Belshazzar, he goes through what happened to Nebuchadnezzar about him going into the field and God humbling him. And in verse number 22, it says, and thou his son, O Belshazzar, hast not humbled thy heart, though thou knowest all this. Belshazzar knew everything that went on with Nebuchadnezzar. He knew everything that happened to him, and he knew why it happened. He knew the whole story. And Daniel looks at him and says, you have not humbled your heart. One more thing. If we do not humble our heart, God will do it for us. All right. We talked about that last week, and that's not where we want to be. That's not where I want to be. All right. That's happened to me. I'm sure it's happened to you from time to time, and it's not pretty. All right. If we do not humble ourselves before God, he will do it for us. We need to keep that in mind. So Daniel tells Belshazzar, says in verse 22, but thou hast lifted up thyself against the Lord of heaven. Now I want you to watch. This is a long verse, but I want you to listen to this. Thou hast lifted up thyself against the Lord of heaven, and they have brought the vessels of his house before thee, and thou and thy lords and thy wives and thy concubines have drunk wine in them, and thou hast praised the gods of silver and gold and brass and iron and wood and stone, which see not. Now listen, nor hear nor know, and the God in whose hand thy breath is. You see that? The God in whose hand thy breath is, and in whose are all thy ways, hast thou not glorified. Our very breath is in the hand of God. All right. Daniel is going to tell Belshazzar here in a minute. He's going to talk about numbering his days. You and I need to realize how fragile our life is here and how quickly it can go away. God talks about in the book of Psalms. It's in the book of Psalms chapter number 87, I think. 80. Wait a minute. I'll find it in just a minute. Here's the point. The point of this is God talks about us numbering our days. Okay. We need to be aware of that. And this idea that the breath of God, that our breath is in the hand of God. All it takes is this, right? He is in complete control of us and everything that we do. We need to be aware of that. We need to be aware of his sovereignty. Now, so here is what Daniel tells Belshazzar. He says, and I can't pronounce this, so I'm not going to try to. He says in verse number 26, it's Mene, verse number 27, Tekel, and verse number 28, Peres. The psalm where it says that our days are numbered, by the way, is Psalm chapter 90, verse number 12. I'm sorry. That's Psalm chapter 90, verse number 12. Now, Daniel tells him, he says, you know better. You knew better. Now, Here comes the judgment of God. Here is what God is going to do about this. In verse number 22, Daniel talks about the fact that thou hast not humbled thy heart. You know, we can't talk about this enough, about how we need to be humble, and we need to be humble in the presence of God, and how important it is that we get our heart right. The Bible talks about out of our heart are the issues of life. We need to pay attention, and we need to understand this idea of being humble, because if we don't, this sin of pride begins to ease in, and now we got problems. All right. So Daniel tells him, he said, you knew better. You didn't humble your heart. You lifted yourself up, and you have not glorified God. Therefore, now in verse number 26, here's what's getting ready to happen. Verse number 26, it says, this is the interpretation. God hath numbered thy kingdom and finished it. God just came to Belshazzar and said, you're done. All right. Your days are done. Your kingdom is done. It's finished. He also says, thou art weighed in the balances and art found wanting. Let's think about this just a minute. Now, Daniel tells Belshazzar that he's weighed in the balances and found wanting. All right. Found wanting. He has not lived up to the standards God expects. He has not obeyed God. He is lacking. He has no spiritual growth. I mean, it's just, I can go on and on and on. All right. This is something that we do not want to find ourselves in a situation where we stand at the judgment seat of Christ and are found wanting. All right. This is bad. This is not a good idea at all. And what we have to realize is that in order to keep from this, all right, we humble our heart, we serve, we're obedient, we pay attention, we love the Lord, we walk with the Lord. And as those things begin to develop, we are no longer found wanting. And when we stand at the judgment seat of Christ, we won't be found wanting. We will have these works that will come through the fire. And we have to pay attention to that, and we have to be careful about that. That is not a place that we want to be. We do not want to be found wanting. Now, as we move through that, we do have to understand we are never going to be completely as Christ-like. We are never going to be completely Christ-like. All right. We work towards that. We talked about the other day, we've been talking about sanctification, becoming Christ-like. We won't be Christ-like until we step through the doors of heaven, but we are to work towards that as much as we can, so we're not found wanting when the time comes. Now, what happens next in verse number 30, and we're going to finish up here in just a minute. It says, in that night, right? In that night, Belshazzar, the king of the Chaldeans, was slain. Right? Here comes the Persians and the Medes. In verse number 31, and Darius the Median took the kingdom, being about 62 years old. Remember in Nebuchadnezzar's dream, all right? Remember Nebuchadnezzar's dream that Daniel interpreted for him, the statue. Remember the statue. The head was gold. The next section was silver. The next section was brass. The next section was iron. What has happened here is this is part of the prophecy of God that he gave Daniel coming to pass. This kingdom just moved from the gold of Babylon to the silver of the Persians and the Medes. We'll see that again on down the road, but we need to remember that, and we need to understand what's happening there. Now, we're pretty much finished here. As you look through this scripture and you read this account, and just every little bit, there's something here that pops out to you and I. That should matter to me. That makes a difference to me. I understand why that's important. And it all begins and it all goes back to Belshazzar in verse 1, where he had this Babylonian spirit and this sin of pride, right? And we see how God dealt with this. We have to understand what God expects from us. And again, we live in a world, in this Babylonian world today, where it would be extremely, extremely easy to step out into it and develop this sin of pride. We have to be careful about that, and we need to watch as we go through our days. We talked last night about our daily walk with God. All right, every day, choices. You see the choices. Belshazzar. You see the choices that he made, and you see what it led to. The first choice that has to be made in the life of a person is to ask Jesus Christ into their life. Until that happens, nothing else works. All right. What you need to concentrate on, if you're sitting here tonight and you're listening to me, or if you're in church and you're listening to the preacher and you're not saved, that needs to be fixed. You have to understand you're a sinner. Now, see, Belshazzar was a sinner and he didn't care. He just kept right on rolling. He had no regard for God. All right. If we continue in this sin, if you continue in this sin, you'll be eternally separated from God. I understand I'm a sinner. I believe that Jesus Christ died for me. I want to be saved. I want to be saved and want Christ in my life. That's all there is to it. You go to Christ and you ask him, please save me. I understand I'm a sinner. I believe in the death, burial, and resurrection, and I want to be saved. That has to come first. Then everything else begins to work. I appreciate your time. Hope you have a good evening. I guess our next Bible study will be Thursday night. We're working in the book of Judges there just a little bit.